Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
Do you like organic fair trade coffee? Do you appreciate a well-made pour-over, but just don't have time for all the rigmarole of setup, cleanup, and brew time? Reach for Mount Hagen coffee. When you want that artisanal flavor, but don't have time for all the bullshit. Mount Hagen coffee, brought to you by Airey Bros Radio. Cheers. I got 4 minutes.
The translation for chaos in Chinese is opportunity, but most people aren't going to play a sport as an adult. So if we take PE and we focus on sports, those aren't really life skills. Culturally, physical education needs to change too. Literally thousands of hours reading and researching. I mean, I've been doing this over 20 years. I'm constantly working on it. Movement and movement skills first, and from there you can be the best football player, best basketball player, best cyclist, best rock climber or whatever. Started teaching elementary PE a couple years ago. I realized the kids weren't connected to their bodies. Their physical literacy was basically zero. I went back to ancient Greece philosophy, which was their main two focus areas were balance and rhythm. Your brain craves mastery, and to master a skill or to strive for mastering a skill is a completely different level of cognitive development than just telling the kids, here's a volleyball, go out and play, or just go out and walk, or just go run a lap. Extremely important if you want to develop children at the neurological level with their brain fitness to teach physical skills. You can't be healthy if you stay inside. One of the things that I did in PE was teach the children how to use their free time in ways that were more constructive, and that's where the outdoor recreation loops back around. So often, if you look at 1 to 10, especially with American culture, we want to go to 10 before we even know 1. This is Ron Jones, and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio.
What's up, y'all? This is Airey Bros Radio, and this is episode 62 with Ron Jones, physical education teacher and executive producer, PE historian for The Motivation Factor. You ready, Prince?
I was just doing my daily calisthenics, warming up for this one, getting all my toe hops in and getting all my posture facilities in a line. So I am ready to rock for this one, Richie Rich.
Imagine living in a world where 50% of your schooling was spent on physical education. Turns out that used to be the case, and Ron Jones is going to hip us to a lot of that information. Ron was a guy that we found through The Motivation Factor. Highly suggest that you check out this award-winning documentary that benefits the classical physical education through history and the methods and the benefits, and how we would all be living in a better place if we spent more time invested in our health and wellness.
Yeah, watching this movie for one of the watch lists on Jules 2.0, I believe you suggested it, really spoke to us and really opened our eyes to how important physical culture was back in the 50s and 60s, and how much a lot of stuff that resonates inside of us today was a key factor to learning back in the day. So when you see something like this, and you have your intuition, certain things that you believe when it comes to movement and fitness and learning, and then you watch Motivation Factor, and that just kind of solidifies all that. It's just lots of great knowledge here, a lot of great practices here. So as always, the Airey Bros are trying to hit people to ways that they can better themselves, ways that they can better their life. So watch Motivation Factor. Going to listen to this podcast, and we're going to get you right on your way to living a healthy, purposeful life.
Amazing conversation with Ron. Everything he says resonates with everything we do, how we live our life, from moving every day, no matter what, even if it's a 30-minute walk, it still counts as exercise. And the benefits in terms of production in society, how people would all benefit from being more active, and coupled with having a healthy, nutritious diet. So amazing conversation with Ron. Super grateful for him coming on and sharing his time with us and all of his information. He is a wealth of knowledge, and I highly recommend that you check out the Motivation Factor, share it with your fans, friends and family, your PE teachers that your educators that in your family. Share this with them. The link is in the show notes, and sit back and enjoy this one. It's a good one, folks.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Airey Bros Radio.
Much love. Namaste from the boys of 1512. Hey, Ron, how's it going?
Hey, Rich. Good to see you.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And you guys are in Colorado?
Denver, yes.
Denver. Okay. How's Denver?
It's, could be a little funky from time to time, but
yeah.
It's not too bad. I mean, we've kind of social distance anyway, just the natural way we live our lives. But when it's forced upon you, you realize that it's a little bit more uncomfortable than you originally thought it was when you're doing it on your own. So we're opening back up, and there's some silly things that we have to comply with in order to do so-called quote unquote normal things. But
yeah.
Overall, it's not too bad. Where are you in California?
Los Angeles.
Oh boy.
Yeah. We're in the suburbs, so it's not as crazy, but still,
Yeah.
It's still, I mean, I don't know. There's still a lot of things you can't do. Like there's a little brewery pub place that always has live music, and they've been closed all year, and it's kind of a drag, because it was a nice place to go just to hear a band and dance a little bit and have fun, and so those kinds of things I miss. But I, like you guys, I spent a lot of time reading and alone anyway, so
yeah,
it was an inconvenience, but it didn't freak me out, which is part of what we can talk about today, because so much of my research is on leisure, and that doesn't sound worth talking about, but it actually was the most important topic in history, according to some people. So
yeah, we
how
definitely want to
spend their free time,
get into physical culture and its history.
Yeah.
Real quick, a little background, what led us to you was that we both have lived in San Diego at different times, kind of overlapping one another a little bit. But by my first house where I lived in Oceanside, California, at this middle school, there was this amazing outdoor fitness park that I had never encountered in my life growing up in New Jersey. It had steel poles, aluminum poles or whatever. So you could climb. It had the parallel bars, up and down. So I just had never seen anything like that. So I went home and did some research, and that led me to some old videos. But this was even before the movie came out, about the PE program that President Kennedy had put together, and did a little deep dive, went down a wormhole, and then fast forward to 2020, we have another podcast with our cousins where we weekly watch list where we come up with different documentaries or things that we can watch so we can discuss on the podcast. And again, the La Sierra PE program came up. And so then when we researched it again, we saw the movie, we put it out there. Everyone was on board with the movie and just blown away with it. And yeah, I mean, physical culture, human optimization, that has been something that has always been a cornerstone for us. And as someone who's been a special education teacher and see the different cuts and things like that, it is very unfortunate to the way that physical education is presented in most school systems, at least in the ones that I've been a part of, both as a student.
No, I hear you.
And as a teacher.
Yeah,
so,
same here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing with that how powerful his speech is, and it's almost like, man, I wish we could just like pump that over and over on Instagram and YouTube and different social media outlets. And that's the big thing with what's going on now, is that with all the talk and all these health experts and everything that's out there, I still have not heard anything or read any articles from mainstream media that is talking about ways to boost your immune system, ways that, exercise is going to benefit you.
Yeah.
They're not scaring us to death with the fact that over 300,000 people die every year because of some obesity related illness or sickness. And so I would just imagine a world where if they bombarded us 24/7, that 330,000 people die every year from obesity. And they started talking about exercise and getting vitamin D, as opposed to, we need a new vaccine, we've got to hurry this up, Operational Warp Speed. So we wanted to get you on because we saw the movie, loved the documentary, loved the stuff that you got going out there. We're into the kind of obscure, the club bells and all that sort of stuff. So
well, I do all that too. And then it's interesting when you talk about, why aren't we having some kind of movement? At the turn of the century, the last century, there was that kind of movement. There was that physical culture drive, and everybody was getting into health and outside and looking at nervous conditions. The book I'm just finishing up today is on neurasthenia. You guys ever heard of that term?
No.
Neurasthenia. You should look it up. I'll send you some references on it. But it was a major global issue around the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Americans were known for having the worst cases of it. And they actually called it Americanitis. But it's basically us going crazy because we work so much and we don't spend our time wisely. And it just makes people nuts. So, the cure that came out of this was going outside, going camping, having hobby skills with your hands and things like that. And then out of that came the medical profession. Pharmaceuticals got involved, and they wanted to make it all about vitamins and hormones and drugs and the rest of the story. Some things don't change much, right? I'm just looking at this, like scratching my head. It's like, we know what works, but we're just frantically running around looking for some half-assed solution that is not dealing with the root cause, which is what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's no money involved in the real things that work.
There you go, man.
Because you could find it on your own, or do it on your own, or grow your own garden.
Yeah, but to your thing about JFK, I'm booked into Washington, D.C. next July to do a presentation to national scientists and policymakers pitching a national PE program. So that is in the works. We've already got a 2-hour slot approved. But I'm just hoping there's something left of us by next summer. That's the problem, because they're going to be whacking PE programs left and right this fall. It appears. And that's sad.
Yeah, and talking about that, the first programs to go are our programs and, phys ed programs. And when you talk about, hey, we need to get kids fit, in this day and age, people just think of sports, right? They don't think about overall well-being and teaching kids skills for life. And that's what I think the motivation factor did, was that, you went back and you talked to a lot of those kids that were in that program, and they still relatively fit, still train. How do we emphasize that in our culture today to kind of get that across of, hey, we have this pandemic going on right now. Maybe it's a good time to focus on our health and teaching people these lifelong skills.
Well, it's a great question and topic, because we are in this like opportunity. I think the translation for chaos in Chinese is opportunity, if I remember right. So it's like we have an opportunity to make a lot of changes, and quite frankly, we need to make a lot of changes. Whether it's institutional racism or physical education or education in general, there's room for opportunity to improve. The skill thing is super important, and I think the reason we made the film is we just needed to tell the story in a real succinct way and condense thousands of years of history into 90 minutes where it's visual, because so much of our culture now is very visual. And I think the first strategic step is to getting people to watch the film, or at least watch the trailer, and start thinking about PE in a different context. Because even with me, if you kind of remove my PE research history and you just ask me, what is PE? Well, it's pretty lame, I mean, my PE experience growing up, except for Mr. Arndt, my fourth grade teacher, who was a former Marine. I love that guy because he came out, he did calisthenics with us. You know, we'd get in trouble if we didn't have good posture and all this stuff. And I remember him leading by example. But outside of that, the rest of my PE experience was pretty lame. And my PE experience was much better than the kids today, because there was actually a little bit left. And so uh, PE is awesome when it's done properly. But as you guys mentioned, it's become sports based, and hey, I'm an athlete. I've done duathlon, and cross country and track, and I have a lot of athletic friends. I've helped with collegiate football conditioning, and I really enjoy working with football. But most people aren't going to play a sport as an adult. So if we take PE and we focus on sports, those aren't really life skills, not really, because you don't know how to take care of your back pain. You don't know how to fix your feet. You don't know how to get your knee out of a bind so you're not blowing up your ACL. If you have a shoulder impingement issue, you don't know how to work your way out of that. All these things were taught in classical PE programs. They were the life skills that people need. And you guys have already alluded to that. So you're way ahead of the curve by thinking that way. And that's what the kids need to learn. And especially, if you think about what just happened, they're at home alone. All these games and sports weren't much good because you're isolated. You got maybe your brother or sister, you're sitting there by yourself. If you don't know what to do, you're kind of screwed. So yeah, it's a huge mind shift, and it's a cultural thing. The connotation to PE is extremely negative, and that's well deserved. And I'm going to throw some criticism at the PE profession itself, because a lot of the PE teachers got very lazy, and they just wanted to do their sport program. So that culturally, physical education needs to change too. It's not easy to teach real PE. You've got to bust your butt, and it's a lot of work. And it's not just work on the field. Um, I spend literally thousands of hours reading and researching. I mean, I've been doing this over 20 years. I'm constantly working on it. You have to have a hunger to improve your profession, and to be the best that you can be. And that goes back to the ancient Greece philosophy of arete. Arete is ARETE with a little asterisk after the E, and a bumper sticker definition is striving for excellence. And so that was a philosophy of living. It's the Western ideal. It's to reach for something better. And I think in PE, we've lowered the bar so far that a snake can't even get under it. You've got to be a gopher now. It's like the good thing about it is we can only go up from here, So I hope that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, it was awesome. Can you pinpoint where the disconnect started?
Yeah, I mean,
what time frame?
Yeah, that's a good thing to talk about for a minute. The classical era was around 1885 to 1920. And 1885 is critical because that's when a big meeting took place that gathered a bunch of people, and they came up with the physical education profession as a way, out of concern over the Industrial Revolution, where all these people were moving into urban environments, and there was concern about not getting enough overall physical activity, especially with the children. So, and then around 1920, it kind of peaked. I mean, it never totally went away because there's always people that still do the Indian clubs and the stall bars and the gymnastics, orthopedic gymnastics and things. But around 1920, and that was related to the geopolitics of World War I, because coming out of World War I, people were very disillusioned with the military, and our approach to physical education was mainly influenced by Germany, which was very, very formalized. And Americans looked at that as, you know, for one thing, we were fighting Germany, but the other thing, it was too like military and formal. So we wanted to do sports. So there was a big shift around 1920 that decided, hey, Americans are going to do sports to take care of PE. And the UK was very sports central too. But we can mark that on the timeline as when we started moving significantly worse, because I don't care what sport you're in, it creates an asymmetry, which for people that don't know what that means is an imbalance. So I came out of cycling. I can tell you people that only rode their bike had horrible dysfunction. You know, I remember once a guy came in for a bike meeting, a community meeting, and he had just ridden a double century, which is 200 miles, and he couldn't pick up a pencil that he dropped on the floor. And I'm looking at that, and he was like 20 years older than me. And I'm like, I don't think this is the way I want to age, you know, because I used to race competitively pretty high level. And so I just got into doing a lot of different types of training. So that from my background, cross country running, same thing. You'll develop all kinds of imbalances if you only run. And so even in World War II, you know, Eisenhower was cited saying, you know, we had 20% more casualties in World War II than World War I, just based on lack of fitness alone. And we look at the greatest generation of World War II, and these guys are studs, man. They were just, and even the women, you know, the WACs and the Navy waves. I mean, the women's were just specimens. They were awesome. I've got training manuals for the WACs in World War II. My athletic men in college would be blown away by some of their routines. That's how fit they were. But even at that, we were less fit and less prepared than we were in World War I, because we got away from the classical model that basically taught movement first. That's the key. Movement and movement skills first. And from there, you can be the best football player, best basketball player, best cyclist, best rock climber, or whatever.
Yeah, you know, Jimmy and I both athletes. We grew up wrestling. Jimmy kind of went more wrestling specific towards college, and then I went down the cross country and track and field route in college. And it wasn't until, and I know there's a lot of controversy around CrossFit, but it wasn't until we found CrossFit that we really started to pay attention to movement and realizing how important posture, position, and movement patterns were. And now as a coach, I deal with the same stuff where I'm constantly telling my athletes, like, we need to incorporate strength training, and postural calisthenics and stuff to help your running. Otherwise, you're at some point you're going to get hurt because you're not fixing your movement patterns and stuff like that. Question would be is then how do we, or in your experiences, how do you get people to buy into your philosophy as in a school system, at least? Because it seems like, again, in the schools that I've been a part of in New Jersey, if you were to try to implement you know, the La Sierra program, I think you would get so much blowback because physical education has deteriorated so much to, I mean, the most that my high school phys ed teachers did was throw us a volleyball at the beginning of class, or a soccer ball, or unlock the equipment room so we could get the lacrosse sticks or whatever. But when you look at the video, the footage, like all of those kids in those PE classes, I mean, they look like specimens. Like every single one of those kids look like a D1 athlete. And like, you go to your sports teams now, and kids don't look like that as
they were
athletes.
They were trained to move well. If you watch the film, and I just put up a bunch of the archive film clips that I had a few weeks ago. I don't know if you've picked through those, but I've probably got, I don't know, over a dozen archive clips that I never shared. I mean, there were little bits and pieces in the film, but I put all those up just to give people access to looking at that and really analyzing the form and stuff too. Because if we go back to running, you can watch the La Sierra boys run. And I'm also a cross country track coach, or have been. their form looks like they're on a D1 cross country team, and these are just the PE kids.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the PE kids at La Sierra didn't play sports. They didn't all play sports. Some of them just were really into PE. And so, yeah, they were trained how to move better. And again, I go back, if people will just, especially teachers, look, if you're a teacher or an administrator and you're concerned about education, take 90 minutes and watch our film. Buy it for $4.95 or whatever it costs, or rent it, and just sit there and watch it and take a few notes and think about what's going on. And if you're not willing to do that, there's not much I can do to help people. I mean, come on. You got to invest a few bucks, equivalent to a cup of coffee at Starbucks, and 90 minutes of your time off social media, and watch something about the future of our country and education. But it is a big sell, and because people are so far removed from PE having any value whatsoever except just flopping around. And I'm going to say, especially to the young people watching, you deserve better than that. I've done some presentations in undergraduate programs, and a lot of times what happens is after I'm done, the young people come up and they start asking me, like, why aren't we being taught this? It's a great question. And then their anger comes out, and not just frustration. They're actually pissed off because, like, we need to be learning this, and it's not right that we didn't have the opportunity to do this kind of physical education growing up. And I agree, it's not good enough. Like, people should have the opportunity to be challenged that way and to learn something. What a waste of time to just have a ball thrown out in PE your whole PE career. It's just not acceptable. So it's tedious though, because people don't understand it. I did corporate health a long time, and one of the corporate managers gave me some great advice when I started. I was very passionate, enthusiastic. He goes, Ron, he goes, culture always wins. And what he was telling me is, like, it doesn't matter what if people don't buy into it, it's not going to work. And so you have to look at your own situation, whether it's New Jersey or California or wherever you're at, and just try to do something better than what you're doing now. La Sierra, the calisthenics routine they did, some PE teachers are running that right now. In fact, I was on the phone yesterday with a PE teacher in Texas, helping him get that started. And it's a good start, but you have to communicate that the whole PE class isn't going to be formalized and forceful calisthenics. It's just a piece of it. But please don't say that the kids shouldn't learn it, or that looks too military, or it's not enough fun, because these are really important skills for people to be able to learn. And it's just part of what I do, because I believe in the art and science of movement. And so the La Sierra routine was very biomechanical and pretty linear. I mean, it wasn't circular enough for me and my philosophy, but that's not all I did. So I knew what it would do, and I also knew what it wouldn't do, and I can take those other things and blend in with it. But anyway, it is a lot of work, but we have to get started somewhere.
So all that said, what does your PE program look like? You take bits and pieces from that program and put a little bit of your own philosophy on it?
Yeah, I mean, after 20 plus years, I mean, I've got a lot of different layers, and I think, like we talked about at the beginning, if you want to be a PE professional, you need to research your profession. And as you get deeply into PE history, you're going to start seeing references that you have to explore. And part of that's going to be modern dance. So part of my research has been deeply into the history of modern dance. Now, I'm not a dancer. I mean, I can go down to the bar and dance, but I mean, I'm not a formalized dancer. My wife went through classical ballet her whole life. I don't have that background, but I've studied it and I appreciate it from the movement aspects. And I took what I learned from modern dance research and I blended that into certain types of hand movements and arm movements with the children. You'll also need to get into outdoor recreation, because that was a huge part of classical PE. It wasn't just like playing basketball. They talked about camping and doing outdoor activities, hunting and fishing, and how to use a knife and how to make a campfire. And I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that were on the fringes, if not directly implemented into classical physical education. You have to research parks and recreation. That was a huge part of physical education in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because as we moved into the cities and the children didn't have anywhere to play, the sociologists started looking at, like, we need to come up with a better way to, facilitate a safe place for them to play so they're not getting, run down in the streets. And also that became fascinating because, and this is very relevant to today, because I've written records of how different races and religions of people came together at parks to blend together, over 100 years ago. And so there was a lot of sociology involved in it. There was physical education teachers at parks. There were family counselors or psychologist type people there. There were librarians and libraries, and there were cooking classes. So the park history was a huge part of physical education. So it's imperative that you start exploring and getting into these different areas. And the undergraduate programs just aren't doing that. So for people listening in school, you're probably going to have to start snooping around on your own. And hopefully you can raise the questions with your professors. And there's some professors out there that might want to explore that, or maybe they know a little bit and they can start teaching it. But
are there any physical education programs out there, universities, colleges, that are head and shoulders above others?
no.
No.
I don't, if you ask me, like, okay, because I get people asking me, hey, my son or daughter wants to major in kinesiology or exercise, what do you recommend? Like, I don't have one school that comes up to the top of my head, like I can just spit out. Unfortunately. Yeah. There are some people out there that have a class here or there. I ran into one guy in Phoenix, a young guy in college, and he said, yeah, my professor, we had a class that talked about this old stuff like you're doing in your presentation today, but he just made fun of it and said they didn't know what they were doing. It's like, well, actually they did know what they were doing. So you might want to revisit that, but he got it right. But to try to bring that back together, my class, when I started teaching elementary PE a couple years ago, I realized the kids weren't connected to their bodies. Their physical literacy was basically zero. And I'm not just talking about kindergarten. I'm talking about sixth graders that have been there 7 years. And so I went back to ancient Greece philosophy, which was their main two focus areas were balance and rhythm. And so without balance and coming through your feet, you're never going to move well. So I started with their feet, which is also a big part of classical PE philosophy. Almost all these systems and programs paid a lot of attention to feet. And a lot of times it was barefoot fitness too, so that's nothing new. So there's a certain routine I did called Find Your Center, where I had them center on their feet and kind of lean out of balance and come up to a central point where they're doing the least amount of work to stand up. And then we did 3 deep breaths, but not just flopping the arms up and down. I took my modern dance research background and I put that into the arm movements and made them circular and flowing. So we were already in kindergarten working on the art of movement with just how we moved our arms and were breathing. And it was very flowing. And I taught them hand and finger exercises because, special education teachers, you can relate to this, I'm sure. There's a need today for occupational therapy for hands because the children aren't being taught how to use their hands. And well, what's the root cause of that? Well, a lot of it goes back to food because so many kids eat fast food. That's gross motor control. You're just shoving a pizza in your mouth or a hot dog or a hamburger, but you're not, and the foods are soft. You're not using a knife, fork, and spoon. Well, if you've ever worked with a small child to teach them how to do a knife, fork, and spoon, it takes a lot of digital dexterity and fine motor control and skill. And if you're eating fast food all the time, you don't do that. So just the little things like that were so important to get children ready to go to school. And we've blown that off. And now we need occupational therapy by first grade with a lot of the kids. So that's how I would start the class. And then with my older kids, I would do the La Sierra routine, a scaled down version of it. I did a lot of speed, agility, quickness drills, which are very fast paced. You can put those in cone groups and run those pretty quickly. but with a heavy emphasis on the skills. Like, okay, we're going to skip. Well, most of my kids in elementary school could not skip. So I had to teach them step by step how to low skip, how to high skip, how to power skip, how to side shuffle, how to karaoke, how to do the high knees, how to do the butt kickers. I mean, and this was constant. It was every single time we did the drills, I was teaching the skills over and over and over and over. And if you're not willing to do that, you probably need to find a different job. I'm just saying, because you have to be able to teach the skills, and the kids culturally, they're not exposed to good quality movement. Even I'll tell you a story. One of my kids, the most quote unquote one of the most athletic boys. He played year-round sports, multiple sports. I was teaching the hip hinge because one of my buddies was a strength coach in the NFL for a Super Bowl team. And he's like, Ron, he goes, the most important thing you can teach an elementary kid is a hip hinge because it all starts there, ends there, right? So I'm like, okay, man, I got to do the hip hinge, man, because this is, Super Bowl team coach. He knows what he's talking about. And one of my boys like, oh yeah, Mr. Jones, we do that in baseball. I go, okay, well, cool, show me. So he drops into the hip hinge and he's completely kyphotic, which for your listeners don't know means your back is all rounded, right? It was awful. And so here you got a year-round athlete who loves sports and PE, thinking he's moving well, and he doesn't have a clue what he's doing. But this is what we've ended up with because we stopped teaching skills decades ago. It's just about the slogan "just do it" is nice for PR, but it doesn't fly when it comes to quality of movement and injury prevention. And also, I would argue as an educator that has also spent some time researching neuroscience and the brain science of movement, that it's your brain craves mastery, and to master a skill or to strive for mastering a skill is a completely different level of cognitive development than just telling the kids, here's a volleyball, go out and play, or just go out and walk, or just go run a lap. There's not a lot of cognitive load with that. There's no challenge. There's no skill development mentally in your brain. So it's extremely important if you want to develop children at the neurological level with their brain fitness to teach physical skills, not just mental skills in the classroom. But it's been shown throughout history that the best way to get people to learn is through the physical. In fact, up to 50% of Greece education was physical. Like half the curriculum was PE, if you look at it that way. In California in late 1800s, they were talking about making PE a third of the curriculum. Why? Because it's critical for learning. What have we done? We've done the opposite. We've taken PE out, and the PE that's in isn't even worth doing. I mean, I would argue, especially in the budget cut discussions going on today, they're talking about cutting PE. I would say, yeah, if you're going to do PE like that, it's a waste of time and money. You might as well get rid of it. Any moron can go out there and just tell the kids to run a lap. You don't need a credentialed teacher paying them that salary and benefits to do that. You just get somebody with a high school education and, that just sit there and watch kids do whatever. I mean, pay a minimum wage, but that's where we're at. So yeah, it's tough, man. It's it's a hard road to go down, but what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to sit around and let things devolve and let our country just continue to decay? I can't do that. I can't.
You're speaking our language, Ron. Everything you're saying is resonating, and there's so much to unpack with that. Yeah, man, what a world it would be if kids were, their curriculum was 40 to 50% of their day was physical culture. And one of the things I always used to, both as a student and as an educator, it used to just perplex my mind that, why I was as a student doing algebra at 7:30 in the morning, or then as a teacher, why I was forced to try to teach kids X, Y, and Z subjects at 7:30 in the morning, when wouldn't we all just benefit if we were, moving for the first hour or 2 hours of the day? And then you read, an article that says like the first hour of every student in China in their morning is they run 2 kilometers, and then they do
Yeah.
calisthenics. And yeah, I mean, it's just,
There's a prep school in Cleveland, and it's been there for over 100 years. And it's where, like, the people from the Cleveland Clinic, the physicians, they send their kids to school. It's very high end school. And it's a boys prep school, and they do 20 minutes of exercise an hour. Now, the top people in the country arguably send their kids there, and they're doing 20 minutes of exercise an hour. And one of the reasons they send their kids there is because they do 20 minutes of exercise an hour. So that just gives you a clue. Like, there's some people that understand this, and they're paying for it. But why can't we do that in public schools? There's a lot of talk about equality now and equal opportunity. It's like, why don't all children have an opportunity to be physically fit and therefore learn at a higher level and have greater opportunities in life? Why don't all children have equal opportunity to avoid disease and pain? And one of the ways that I talk to the kids, and if you talk to kids about, well, you don't want to develop back pain, so you should do this. I do that, and I know it doesn't work very well, but I do it anyway because I can't help myself. But one of the things that did stick with them is I started asking them about the people that you live with at home, your adult parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. How many of them have back pain? And most of the kids will raise their hand. We start talking about the pain that their family members are living in. That seemed to connect to them a little bit more. It's like, okay, well, these things are teaching you how to prevent that or get yourself out of that if you develop it later. But I'm going to put this on you, and this comes from classical PE too. You need to learn something well enough to go teach someone else. So they became the teachers at home. And that was pretty powerful for a lot of the students because I started getting some feedback from the parents thanking me that their elementary school children brought neck exercises home or back exercises home, and they were getting out of pain or the pain was just gone. That's pretty powerful stuff. It was nothing that I invented. This is all out of classical PE. I just know where to look. I didn't invent any of this. My way of teaching it might be a little bit unique, based on all the different influences that I have. Um, but I didn't invent this stuff. I'm just paying it forward, if you will. So these are the kind of skills that children should be learning. I mean, if you go all the way through, you know, 12 years of school and you can't even hip hinge, you don't know how to stand properly, you don't know the first thing about walking. Walking was a skill taught extensively. You don't know how to teach someone else how to run. We've wasted 12 years of PE and a lot of money. What are we doing? I mean, really, that's craziness. But that's the state of the union today is in PE is that way. I say the kids are capable. It took about 18 months and I really started seeing the kids come around. Like, I mean, I'm looking at some of the elementary kids, even by third grade, like they're running like gazelles. I mean, they're going to be cross country stars. They're going to have a higher opportunity to be physically active for life based on what they've been able to learn, and that they are capable, but we have to give them a chance. We're not giving them a chance. It's not fair. Why aren't we doing it? It's a valid question. Why aren't we doing it? If we're not listening to science and we're not listening to history, who are we listening to?
Follow the money.
Well, I would argue that, yeah, pharmaceuticals and whatever,
Well, you always hear people generation to generation, you always hear people say, oh, the kids these days.
Mhm.
But it's not the kids. I mean, they're just following the lead of parents or teachers or administrators. And so it's not necessarily, it's not the kids. It's how they're being raised or how they're being taught or what they're being taught. Because we all know that in those developmental ages, as you're saying, in nursery school, kindergarten, first grade, they're like sponges. So um, if you give the kid a postural foundation or very calisthenic gymnastics oriented uh, physical program at that early age, that carries.
Yeah.
I've seen guys that are overweight big dudes, but their moms were gymnastics coaches, and they still have the ability to do a perfect handstand or can do a
Yeah.
pistol squat, and you're
Yeah.
like, wait, well, how did you just do that? And it's like, well, my mom was a gymnastics coach, and this is what I did, as from 5 to 10 years old. I was a gymnast.
It makes a huge difference when people learn the skills early, because it's so much easier to learn when you're 5, you know. And that's a valid point. This kind of leads us into, because you mentioned how kids are raised, they're just a product of the culture, basically. The number one goal of education, and this is something I've only really clarified the last couple years, and you guys are both in education, and if you don't have what I think is the right answer, I understand why. But what's the number one goal in education, you think, or should be? And take in historical context too. Just guess.
I
To
mean,
better oneself, to get better people.
So citizenship. Yeah, that's a good guess. Rich?
yeah, I was going to say to give people a skill set for life, whether it's physical culture or to be a critical thinker, a communicator. That's what my opinion is. It's not about training to take a test. It's life skills, it's physical culture, it's how to take care of yourself, how to balance a checkbook, like things that just seem to fall through the cracks oftentimes.
Yeah, you're on the right track, because both of you didn't say to get a job, which is pretty important, because that's not really what school's supposed to be about. You're not supposed to be trained to be a consumer and just make money. And if you go back to, well, how do you make the best citizen? How do you develop the culture? This goes back to ancient Greece philosophy. It's the most important thing that I can teach in the rest of my career. And it's how people spend their leisure time. And so what is leisure time? It's time that you have left over after you go to work, after you've eaten, and after you get your sleep. For children, it would be work would be replaced by school. So that still leaves us with hours a day, right? And in the classical definition of leisure, it should be to educate you and to elevate culture. And so start asking yourselves, and myself included, in our free time, what are we doing to educate ourselves and elevate culture? And most Americans don't spend that time wisely. So it's been said throughout history that how a person and nation spends their leisure time determines their success or failure. So when I look around America and I see so many people wasting their time on things that don't matter, that are just absolutely stupid, it it makes sense to me that people aren't behaving very well. And I'm not just talking about things happening in the moment. I mean, you look back at the last few decades. If you're playing Grand Theft Auto for hours a day and just doing, TikTok stuff and just watching stupid stuff on television, how do you expect to be a better person? You know, I mean, history is very clear on this. So part of that leisure time for me is just amusement. And I'm if you think of a pie, I'm gonna like slice just a little piece off for just silly amusement stuff. But I I know when I'm in that little piece that I can't play there too long. And then there's sometimes I'm just too tired of reading and my brain is just fried. I'm gonna watch it like a stupid movie. So I get that. I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that at all. But if all your leisure time is spent there, you're in big, big trouble. In fact, people said over the generations, you're going to make yourself crazy. So when we went into the COVID-19 lockdown, I knew America was in trouble psychologically and socially, because most people don't know how to spend their free time. And now all of a sudden, you can't go anywhere. You've got all this free time. And I knew we were going to have civil unrest before the summer. I knew that because I know history, and I to some degree, you can predict the future with history, and it doesn't surprise me at all. So one of the things that I did in PE was teach the children how to use their free time in ways that were more constructive, and that's where the outdoor recreation loops back around, because I made a huge, huge effort to get the kids to understand that you can't be healthy unless you go outside and connect to nature. It's impossible. Not when you're talking about true health. Most people don't talk that way. You can't be healthy if you stay inside. Can't do it. You might not have a disease at the moment, but that doesn't mean that you're truly healthy, right? Holistically. And so, going out, camping, hiking, going to the park, playing frisbee, reading, hobbies were a big part of this conversation. It's been said that if you don't have a hobby, that you're going to also go crazy. And this came out of the industrial era when we lost our spiritual value in our work. Because if you go back to a tribal civilization where, let's say you were a basket maker, you would start this basket from chopping down the reeds and wetting them and drying them and weaving them. And then the finished product you would actually put in the hand of a person. And there was a spiritual value in the mastery of that skill and also the process of doing it. And then we went from that kind of work to an assembly line where you're putting a bolt in this engine block at the Ford factory, And so people were very disconnected spiritually with their work, and therefore the hobbies and the leisure time became critical to maintaining mental stability and balance. And so if we're looking about, well, Ron, what do you know that can help us get out of the situation we're in? All these different problems. We need to be spending our leisure time better. And the leisure time, the physical activities were an emphasis in the leisure time because it's through the physical that we learn the best. And we also maintain just general physical fitness for exercise physiology purposes. That's important for heart health and body fat, control and all that kind of stuff too. So what are you doing in your leisure time? And are you doing a hobby that involves your hands? Because the hands and the fingers are directly tied in history and current neuroscience to how the brain functions. If you want to optimize brain fitness and brain health, you need to be using your hands and fingers in a skillful way. So how do people do that? If you're just poking your phone, that's not going to cut it, right? So for example, I do wood shop stuff around the house. My friends think I'm got mad skills. I just have basic skills. I just grew up doing this stuff with my dad in the garage and playing around with it. So I do things like that. I have a bow. I practice archery. I'm learning how to play the drums. So you've got drumsticks and your feet and hands are involved with cross lateral patterns. And, I do things with my hands as much as I can. And basically for my brain. And my fitness training is reflective of that philosophy too. How I use a health wand in an Indian club and how I use a kettlebell and how I run is radically different than how most people engage with those activities, because I'm thinking of the neurology part of it, because feet are very much like hands. So how I use my feet is very skillful. And I taught my children that in PE, how to use their feet in a skillful way. So this is again, I didn't create any of this. This is just stuff that I've read over the decades that people need to be learning, especially younger people in college that want to go into education, or younger people that are wanting to become parents of children. You better be doing this at home because the schools aren't doing it. I don't see the schools doing it in the immediate future at any national level, although maybe next summer after the presentation in Washington, D.C., we'll come up with a national effort like JFK was pushing, and that would be awesome. But in the short term, we have to be doing it on our own.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, back throughout history that, certain tribal cultures, their work had a spiritual aspect to it. And one thing that was kind of a light bulb for me and Richie is putting that spiritual aspect into my fitness, putting intention into my fitness. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, you ask people why are you doing it? And I've been criticized at times for talking about philosophy, and here's my spin on that. If you're not talking about philosophy of movement, you're not going to get there. Period. The philosophy comes first, and that's what you're talking about. Why are you doing it and how are you doing it? If it's just about a six pack and about getting a max PR lift on this kettlebell or Olympic lift, then that's pretty shallow. So there has to be a deeper purpose to it. In classical PE, there was a thing called noble purpose, and it meant preservation of nation. So you start that by taking care of yourself, and then you take care of your family, and then you take care of your community, and then you take care of your country. And it was just how things have been done. So now it's very, very shallow, and it becomes about the selfie and the likes and shares and memes and whatever. It's like, well, I get that. That's like a small slice of the pie again, but be careful of how much you play there. Here's something to write down related to this. It's a big idea out of history: art and utility. So what that means is the basket weaver, if we go back to that tribal example, it's the basket is designed to hold food or whatever, but there's an art in it. If you look at ancient Native American pottery and the designs they put in it, they could have just made a pot to hold the soup or whatever, but they put designs in it. Why? It's the art of life, right? So I look for art in utility. I need to go running to get my cardiovascular fitness, 3 times a week. That's the utility part of it. I'm going to do mountain hill training because I run off road, because I'm going to get my heart rate higher. I'm going to be under more biomechanical load with my feet because I'm running on a trail versus concrete or pavement. That's the utility part of it. But where's the art? I'm going to run this like a gazelle. I'm going to run it like a Native American who didn't make noise when they moved through the forest. That's the art in it. So art and utility, that's something that has changed my life, that I learned out of history, and I put that into my teaching. Yes, there's a practical reason we need to do X, Y, and Z, but if we strip the art away from life and education, we'll crush civilization. And this is my big concern right now, because what are they looking at doing this fall with our schools? They want to rip out PE, and they want to take out art, and they want to take out music. And then you're going to put the kids in a class, maybe with a shower curtain around them, and they're going to be crammed full of science, technology, math, English. Like, those are all important areas. I'm also a credentialed English teacher, so I get that. But if you take the art and movement out of life, it's not even worth living. This is a dangerous, dangerous path. I can't overemphasize this enough. It's not going to end well. It's not. It never has, and it won't end well this time. We have to be very, very careful of that.
Yeah, I think what you said with, taking the art and taking the music and all that out and not giving that to kids and just cramming down the sciences and the math, it's almost like a minimal effective dose with the science and math. Get them tired, get them running, get them moving, put them in a classroom for a half hour, 45 minutes, spit it down their throat, get them go do some art, whatnot, go back, learn a little bit more, maybe some more art, music, whatever. I think that might be a better way to learn. I know for me, especially during this time of the lockdown and doing all my classes online, I have to take breaks. I have to go walk. I have to go move. Like you said, every 20 minutes, do a little something. I learn better that way.
Yeah, well, and that history would agree with that. So would neuroscience, but that's not how we're doing it, right? There was a whole thing 100 years ago about outdoor education, and people have been rumbling about that a little bit lately and looking at the history of that. And actually, I learned some stuff that I didn't know in the last few weeks about it. But that was quite a robust program, and it might have been even related to the 1918 flu, because there was a whole thing in that era about hygiene. And because of tuberculosis and the 1918 flu, influenza, the recirculated air and getting fresher air in schools and just being outside. So there's, again, we can learn from history. If you're in an environment that is conducive to going outside, like you guys have been in San Diego, I'm in Los Angeles. I mean, we don't have a lot of rain. It's usually pretty nice. We can go outside a lot and get some distancing and get fresh air, and just the concept of being outside with the birds and the wind and just the stimulation part from the sensory input to the brain is way more stimulating than being inside a classroom without windows and with recirculating air. Because a lot of classrooms today don't even have a window. It's crazy. Or they got one little window. It's like, there was a big study in Texas that was published in 1949 by a guy named Harmon. It took 9 years. He studied 160,000 children in Texas. 14 state agencies were involved. A massive study. And he looked at the classroom environment from a postural facility standpoint, meaning how were the desks set up? How were the children sitting? What were the angles of the desktop? What kind of paint did they use? How did the light refract off the paint? Where were the windows? What kind of glass was in the windows? Where were the lights positioned? What kind of light bulbs were used? What kind of angle were the children sitting to the chalkboard, and how did their eyesight affect their ability to see the chalkboard at this angle of the room versus over here? I mean, it was extensive. It's probably the most intense study I've ever read in my life, and we're not using any of it. So, and they tied all this directly to health. They tied it to dental health. They tied it to vision and hearing. I mean, it was really interesting how just the physical surroundings or positioning you're in as a child when you're learning in school is tied to so many other like organic health issues. And that was a huge study. You'll hear people talk about it in optometry because it's still that article or that report is still circulated a little bit with behavioral optometrists. But outside of that, very few people know about it. By the way, the ideal reading and writing angle is about 22 degrees. So if you think back to old school desks, they were never flat, they were angled. And the reason for that is because it preserves proper posture, and you don't have to hike up one shoulder and then rotate your body like you do in a flat top desk. And so as soon as you do that, you start getting myofascial lines wrapping and solidifying and postural deformities. And I've mentioned to other people that by second grade, probably 80% of my kids, I can see a deformity developing. Now, this is behavioral. It's not something they were born with. It's based on bad posture and improper movement patterns by second grade. By third or fourth grade, I have children moaning and groaning when they get off the ground because they have back pain. I mean, come on, man. When I was in fourth grade, the concept of back pain wasn't even on my radar screen. I was ballistic all the time, I mean, there was no pain in my body whatsoever. I was just moving. But that's where we're at today because we're not teaching movement skills.
I think I was at the tail end of those desks in elementary school because we had those desks that, you could open them up and put them at different angles, but there was never any education as to why that desk was designed like that. It was just like, oh, you just happen to get the goofy desk when, the other kid next to you got the new desk, and somehow you were getting made fun of because of the desk you were sitting in and not being told like, hey, you actually have the good desk and this is the way you should be sitting. And the other thing is with posture, you always sitting at the dinner table, you get sit up straight or, don't slouch your shoulders. Coming from mom and dad, it's whatever. I mean, what is the education like with the elementary school kids? How do you get them to understand or to buy into those sorts of things? Because I feel like for me, or even for maybe Jimmy, that sort of education at that level would almost be lost. I got, obviously part of it goes down to the educator who's presenting it, but
yeah, it's not on the radar screen. It's critically important. That was a foundation of classical PE. There were 3 content areas of PE classically. One was restorative arts, and that's where I play. That's getting the body back to a natural state. That's the safety of movement. It's postural education. To me, that's and to history, that's the most important thing. So I start there. That's where most of my work is done today. The second area was martial combative. So you need to know how to defend yourself and your family and your nation. This is part of classical PE. And then the third is pedagogy. And that's where philosophy comes in, and sports, play, recreation, dance, games, and things like that. So we have sports and games in the pedagogy in. Hardly any PE programs teach martial arts or self-defense anymore, and forget about restorative arts and things that are postural because that's just not there. So how do you do that? Well, I did it with my kindergartners and the find to the center drill. I actually did a video on how I teach that. I can send you guys. You could see exactly how I did it. And interestingly, after I put all that together, just based on things I had in my head, I found an almost identical program in a book written in the 1920s by a dance instructor on brain exercise and science. And this is how one of the things that she did. I'm like, wow, I must be on the right track, because that's like almost identical to what I'm doing. And it's how to center on your feet. Now, a lot of other systems will use a foot centering kind of philosophy too. You'll see that in Brain Gym, which is a learning system that's been around the classroom for over 30 years, helping children with cross-lateral movements to optimize brain function with ADHD and learning disabilities. You'll see it in ballet, you'll see it in martial arts, but this is just how I do it. So I think you start as early as possible. And posture has a really bad rep, because when you mention that, people think, oh, you're teaching the kids how to be stiff. It's like, no, there is no one optimal posture, because posture always changes. It's where you're at, setting you up for the next movement, if you kind of look at posture that way. But there is an optimal way to stand. And I think there's a benefit in having people stand in a neutral position and just teaching them where neutral is. And then from there, yeah, we can go cross lateral and diagonal and rotational. But if you can't stand up straight without being stiff, there's probably not much else that's going to go well for you on the movement spectrum. So there is a place for that. And to get back to the question again, how do you do that? I start with kindergartners. I interviewed Jack LaLanne before he died for my master's thesis. It was fascinating. And one of the things he said is we need to be educating kids as soon as possible about health and fitness, because he said, if you wait till high school, it's too late. He goes, McDonald's is spending all kinds of money educating kids, in kindergarten and first grade. Why can't we? And he had a good point. So the sooner the better. And ideally it starts at home. As a teacher, I'm going to tell the parents, it's your responsibility to be teaching at home. Don't expect the schools to teach your children everything. You need to start at home. Get off your phone and get them off the phone and start raising your kids. Because if we're going to let the phones raise the kids, we're just going to have more problems like we're having today. And there is a move, even with people your age that are so much younger than me, to get back to these skills that create mental stability and clarity. The camping, the wood shop, the pottery. I mean, I'm seeing younger people doing these types of things. They're turning on to that again, and they're taking that technology break. And I think that's a good sign, and super, super important too.
In your opinion, what ages should those fundamental skills be learned, and then at what age should they introduce sports into that once they have that foundation of basic movement?
That's a good question. In my TK, which is pre-kindergarten through 6th grade elementary experience, I didn't teach any sports. It was all based on movement, and then we did games. And then the games for me, and I taught the kids too, this is your opportunity to apply all the movement skills that we're learning. So when we're playing dodgeball, and they love dodgeball, by the way, when we play dodgeball and you drop down so you don't want to get hit in the head with the ball, use your hip hinge. Use the connection with your feet. Use your neck mobility to look left and right. Use your hand-eye coordination to catch the ball when the ball's coming at you. And I kept trying to relate it back to what we're learning. And then we would do some football catch and occasionally, just do a little playing with sports. But I never did soccer. I never just did, okay, we're going to play football. I never did, we're just going to do baseball. We might do some of the skills, like how to throw the football, how to kick the football, how to catch the football. And that was just a way of teaching them how to use their hands with their eyes. But it wasn't necessarily teaching them how to go out and play football as a game. And I think in elementary school, that's pretty important. A lot of the kids are getting the sport part on their own anyway, with their extracurricular activities after school. And so, and then I would argue they're probably doing too much of it if you look at orthopedic injuries with kids today and overuse injuries. So the thought that they're going to play soccer, 5 or 6 days a week and go to a tournament for Saturday and Sunday and play 6 games or whatever it is, and then they're going to play soccer and PE too, I don't think so. They don't really need to be doing that. So that's my philosophy. I didn't do sports in elementary. And I know in middle school they get more into, okay, we're doing a volleyball unit. And I think by middle school, you're kind of getting into that. But I think no matter what age group you're looking at, the movement skills should always be there. They should never just be replaced, because even at age 60, I'm still improving my form. That's the Greek arete again. It's striving for excellence. I might not be as fast as I was when I was your age, and I'm not, or as strong, or as flexible. But from a skill standpoint, I'm still looking for ways to improve. I'm still getting better as a runner. Like, one of the things I taught myself the last year was how to do nasal breathing, because I started researching the history of oral fascial health, and everybody's getting braces. Like, back in the day, people didn't need braces because the food was harder and it developed the musculature in the jaws, and the teeth were in different alignment because of the hardness of the food. And people were made fun of by Native Americans when they came over from Europe for breathing with their mouths open. So I'm like, there's a lot of history to this. Why am I not doing it? So I taught myself how to run with my mouth shut. I thought I was going to die the first few times, but this is an improvement for me. I'm now filtering all my air, and there's just a different kind of chi energy to it. So you always look to improve and always come back to the basic skills, because so often, if you look at 1 to 10, especially with American culture, we want to go to 10 before we even know 1. And the master teachers I've worked with, whether it's martial arts or movement, say what you realize when you get this figured out is that you really focus on 1, and then you go to 2 or 3 or 4, and then you realize, hey, there's a bunch of stuff at 1 I didn't get the first 50 times through it, and you go back to 1. You're always going back to the fundamentals if you're a high level athlete. If you don't know what you're doing, you're often 10 and moving like crap. But if you know what you're doing, you're going to go back to, how am I using my feet? How am I using my hands? And it's been argued the Olympic gold medalists are just better at the fundamentals. I've worked with a gold medalist snowboarder, and he's so focused on the details and the fundamentals, and he's a student of movement, and all that feeds into, okay, now he's going down a snowboard, I don't know, 60 miles an hour, whatever, but it's a pleasure to work with people that are interested in learning. But I also have elementary kids like that. Some of them were obese. They had a chance to succeed because my program philosophy was arete, strive for excellence. You could be the slowest person here and the weakest person, but if you're improving your skills, whether it's mental or physical, you're being successful. So every day they had a chance to succeed. And I had a lot of the obese kids really turn on to that. They'd never been given that opportunity. Because if you're doing soccer, man, and you're drastically overweight, it's not going to work out too well for you. And that's sad because, most children today are overweight and out of shape. So the current PE model is not fitting them very well. They deserve better.
Yes, they do, 100%. And with the PE program and talking about children with obesity, how much of a component is nutrition?
No, it's a lot of it. And it's not just that. It's multiple factors, Rich, because you've got people that they grow up right out of the womb. They're putting a phone or tablet in their hand, and I don't know if you've ever watched like a 2-year-old on a tablet or a phone, but it's addictive. It's scary. It's really frightening to me. And it's a lot easier as a parent just to give your kids a device. You don't have to think about it. And they'll sit there and be hypnotized for hours, but they're not learning anything. They're walking into a restaurant oblivious to how to socialize with real people. And from a self-defense martial arts position, with the little bit I know about it, it's like, that's dangerous, man. You have no idea who's around you, what they're doing, what kind of weapons they might have. I mean, it's not that we're paranoid, but we need to be aware, right? So, but a lot of it is, it's awful, the food they feed the kids in schools. And this was all written about 100 years ago too. And it's like, why aren't we doing a better job with this? I mean, if you're going to feed the kids, you know, Doritos, and the teachers are giving the kids candy. I got a lot of pressure from teachers. Well, just give them candy. It's like, I'm not doing it. Well, they'll do anything if you give them candy. I'm not giving an obese child candy. It's unethical. I'd rather deal with the behavior issues, you know, but I'm not going to be part of the problem. I'm not doing it, you know? So, yeah, that's part of it. I think they started to figure that out when we went into lockdown, because I started talking more about immunity and how, because of this COVID-19 issue, your immunity is a big part of, you staying healthy in general. And they started to make that connection, a little bit of a fear factor way, but one of my mentors was a physical therapist for over 40 years, and he's fascinating. His name's Jake Monlux. Look up his website. It's called Kids Failed Fitness, kidsfailedfitness.org. And he's got a ton of research there, scientific references to different areas of concern for children today, from obesity to, lack of motion disease. And he's the one that got me to understand that the cardiovascular fitness is what the kids need to build their immune system. And without that, they don't have an immune system to fight off disease and illness in the proper way. And he has a thing called the lost hour. And the lost hour is the hour of PE children used to have a day. And that's what we need. And he's not talking about the flop the ball around PE. He's talking about real PE, because he came out of the YMCA and actually tried out for the Olympic gymnastics team in the 1950s. He's in his 80s now. And fascinating guy. He's up in the Seattle area, and I contacted him, and he immediately invited me up to visit him. And I got on a plane. I flew from LA to Seattle. I spent all weekend with him and his wife talking about the history of PE, and him teaching me things about physical therapy and PE and gymnastics that I'd never heard of before. And then I went back a second weekend and took my son with me. But there are people out there like that you have to seek out. And it might not be him specifically, but people your age. Who are the people in your neighborhood or community that might know something? Where are the retired physical therapists and PE teachers? And some of them might not have anything worthwhile to say, but they could be like Jake, who's like a wealth of information. Like, there's no way I could read that stuff. He just had to tell me and point me in the right direction and show me some things. It's fascinating. So yeah, the obesity, the horrible food the kids are eating, the sedentary behavior, it all factors into their weight. I'll tell you a story about a little girl in kindergarten. She was the heaviest child I've ever seen at age 5. She was morbidly obese. I mean, it scared me when I saw how big she was, to the point where I called the nurse and I said, "What's up with this kid?" "Well, the doctor said she was healthy and checked her off for school." I don't care what the doctor said. There's a problem. Called the district nurse. "Well, there's nothing. We don't have a program for obesity. We don't know what to do with her." Started trying to call the community centers, because I wanted somebody bilingual that spoke Spanish, and I couldn't really connect her to a program in this particular community where I was teaching. And so it became up to me just to take care of her. And she was absolutely terrified the first day of PE. The fear in that child's face. It makes me emotional just thinking about it. And so I made her a special project, and I made sure that she had a level that she could feel successful at. And she struggled to get up off the floor when we were doing yoga, right? But she became a huge fan of PE because she knew I was going to give her something that was going to be challenging that she could safely do. And she loved PE. So without giving her a chance like that, there's no way in hell she'll ever have a chance to work off all that extra weight with physical fitness. And of course, that's a pretty tough way to get rid of the weight if you're not eating well. But at least she has a connotation to physical education her very first year of PE that's positive. And maybe that little spark will give her a chance later in life. But, if you come out and you're playing soccer right away, and I mean, she was so big, it just was tragic. I mean, it's not going to go well. So I think the philosophy really needs to change in physical education, because we do have a generation of kids that they're extremely overweight and very, very unfit from a skill standpoint, plus just physical fitness in general.
So what do we do? Where do we go from here? How do we get more people involved? Where do we direct them? What information should they be checking out? What school board administrators do we need to be shaking?
Yeah.
It is definitely an epidemic, and I think they're saying that this generation is the first generation that might be outlived by their parents.
Oh yeah, that's I would agree with that. I think if they can just watch our film or at least the trailer, that's it's the quickest way to get your head around this. Because when you say PE, the connotation of that, even with me before I did the film, was pretty negative, and rightfully so. It's just devolved into a bunch of crap that really isn't worth much time or money. But the real PE history that we have is really, really rich. And if we can just get behind the philosophy that, you know, we need to create better citizens, we need to give the kids life skills so they can become the best athlete or the best hiker or surfer or whatever later in life on their own. They need some skills that they can use to take care of themselves. That's one question for the parents to ask right now. Like, go to your school, find out what they're doing for PE, and ask yourself, how are those skills going to help my kid as an adult later in life? Not just keeping him busy for a few minutes to get him out of the teacher's hair, but where the life skills part. And the guy in Texas I talked to yesterday, they're moving away from the sport model in their school system and going to a movement model, and where they're teaching more skills and they're pulling out the team sports and getting back into the skills. And they're playing games and stuff too, but they're not just going to do sports semester after semester anymore. It's a culture shift, and the kids are not too happy about it, but you just have to do it slowly over time. And until we can get our heads around doing that, we're going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. I mean, how many physical therapists do we need here? I mean, and how many pharmaceutical drugs do people need to be addicted to because of chronic pain that would be eliminated if they could move well? If you don't know how to move and your joints are all messed up, it's hard to have a good life if you're in chronic pain. I know, because I did corporate health 15 years. I mean, I work with so many people that were in chronic pain and injured based on poor movement skills alone. Basically, my corporate career was about PE. I became a corporate PE teacher because these adults would come to me and they didn't even know how to stand or walk or sit. And they were out trying to do a 10K to get points for the wellness program. It's like, this is insane, right? So I actually had walking classes in corporate with adults. And they got their head around it. Over time, they realized, like, Ron's really here to help us. And I taught adults how to run. I did the same skills that I do with my elementary kids. And so watch the film, get your head around that PE is the most important subject in school historically. The school system was built on the foundation of physical. This goes back to ancient Greece. We've ripped that out as the foundation. That's why our education system is struggling so much today. And that's what JFK knew. That's why he was pushing La Sierra as the gold model for physical education. And Laprati was talking about taking all the sports out of La Sierra, but he left to go to other places and take opportunities before that happened. But that's the direction he was headed. He was going to make it all physical fitness and no sports. And by the way, at La Sierra, they didn't do preseason conditioning for any of their sports because the boys were already so fit from PE, they didn't need to do it. So when football was time to start football, they just walked on and started doing sport specific skills, and boom. And they played at a very high level. So think about that. How many PE programs could say that today? Not many.
None.
Forget about preseason. We don't need it. We get it all year long in PE.
Yeah.
And then just start thinking about it, the importance of movement, and how am I spending my leisure time? That's been a really good message for people. I work a lot with global educational kinesiologists, and typically these people are they're pretty experienced. They've been around for decades, and that's been something they've picked up on. Like, how am I spending my free time, and how am I spending my free time in a way that involves hand skills for a hobby? That's a big tip I can leave today for people too. Old school stuff. Maybe find grandma and do some quilting with her.
I was just gonna say crocheting.
Hey, one of the most dangerous guys I know in martial arts, knits. Yeah. So if you see this guy with kind of a scrubby little beard, he's about 40, and he's knitting a beanie at the airport, leave him alone. But he does it to because he's also a brain science guy, and he does it to take care of his hand skills and optimize brain function. But he's knitting me beanies and all kinds of stuff. So, but there's a lot of history to that and a lot of value in it.
One last question I have for you, Ron. I'm a film student right now, and you were the executive producer on The Motivation Factor. What went into that, and getting all the information and getting the people you wanted to talk to, and the back end of putting that movie together?
Oh my gosh, what a project. Doug Orchard, the filmmaker, could tell you more, but it was how it all came to being is that I learned about La Sierra from one of my mentors, and I started researching La Prade and La Sierra, and there was virtually nothing out there. But I took what I had and I wrote a post on it, and his daughter found it on the internet, and she called me directly from South Carolina. He only had one daughter. And she goes, I need you to come visit me because I have something for you. So this has happened to me multiple times, right? I'm like, okay, so I get on a plane, I fly all the way across the country to somebody's house that I've never met this person, and I don't have any idea what I'm walking into. And it's down this little dirt road in South Carolina, and it kind of was like Deliverance, It was I was getting these weird vibes, and there's a great big Rottweiler in the front yard. It's like, oh my God, like I'm never going to be found, But it ended up being legit. And what she did was she goes, my dad would want you to have this to move it forward, and she gave me most of her father's archives from his whole career in La Sierra. So I had one full military trunk from World War II full of stuff, and also another trunk full of stuff. And so I took all this by myself. That was another story. Physically, I took every bit of fitness I had by myself to get all that stuff into the airport, onto the plane, and into my car after when I got to LA. That was funny. But I literally didn't know it was in there. I mean, there was just all kinds of stuff. In there was 16 millimeter film with sound of JFK's speech, which no one that I knew had ever seen before. Even the JFK library doesn't have that posted. They have the audio posted, but not the film. So I told my friend Doug Orchard, who is a filmmaker, about my experience. He goes, wow, that's fascinating. That might be a film. I go, a film? Who would watch a film on PE? That's a ridiculous idea. But anyway, that's how it got started, because in that trunk was just, as you guys know, because you've watched the Motivation Factor documentary film, it was a wealth of information that basically changed Doug's life and mine, and the lives of many people that had no idea that PE used to be like that. But it was a ton of work. The historical research on that, I still work on that film every week, and it's been out for years now. It took us years of researching, and on the technical side, like the kinesiology biomechanics side, I'd be super careful about the directions for the calisthenics routine. I had to have spot on, like flawless. And La Prade didn't have records of how he actually taught the methods, like specifically, and I needed that as an instructor. And so I had to go back into the World War II manuals, World War I, and also back in the 1800s. And I use multiple sources and cross-reference them to figure out the best way today to teach that particular exercise in the routine. And mind you, some of the exercises I'd never seen before. Like the full bend, I'd never seen anybody do a full bend until we got into the film research. And it looks like a toe touch, but it's got a flinging arm motion when you stand back up. And that was a real popular drill in World War II. And when I realized as I got into the research, and my friend Shane Hilton from University of North Dakota was helping me on this too. He's a good military history, martial arts guy, that every single exercise in the Lossier routine had a restorative capability to it. If you use it according to World War II standards, even the side straddle hop, which we call a jumping jack today, but there's a difference between a jump and a hop. And hops should precede jumps. Hops are for feet, ankles, Achilles tendons, calves. That's your foundation, your base. And so when you have people jumping up on a box and you're not addressing the foot fitness, you've got things in verse. So these are the things I learned through the film research I didn't quite understand until I got into the film. Because I'm looking at all these hopping drills, like they look like a bunch of kangaroos, like they're doing hundreds of hops. What's the deal with the hops? And then it went back to TK Curitin, who was a rock star of exercise physiology and exercise science and sports medicine, starting back in the World War II generation. And he was known for a lot of things, but the hopping routines came from TK Curitin and in Chicago. He was also one of the founding members of American College of Sports Medicine. So there was just a lot that went into it. It had to be very historically accurate, and there were a lot of social issues that went into it. We had medical people involved. I mean, it was massive. Doug interviewed over 200 alumni for the film, and of course, only a few of them got in the final cut. But with just a massive amount of information, and literally, we still work on it every week. So, but I think when you make a documentary film, and I never set out to do that, a lot of it's a labor of love. And I know I spent 20 grand of my own money on it, and I haven't made a dime in that film. And nor has Doug. We've invested tens of thousands of dollars in it, but someone has to do it. If not me, who's going to do it? And Laprati's daughter is looking at me saying, my dad would want you to do this. I think you're the guy. What am I supposed to do? Say no? And you're giving an opportunity. You figure out how to do it because it's the right thing to do. And so that's how the film came to being. And the film still has a lot of shelf life. I think it's going to circulate back around over and over again. It's a good piece of work that will outlive me. And Doug and I both are really, really proud of it. And again, we didn't create any of the routines, or we just knew where to look and how to tell the story. But it's very accurate, very accurate.
Well, we're going to get you that Airey Bros bump worldwide, so we're going to get it back circulating. Our cousin is a principal, and he's already started to circulate it amongst his physical education teachers, because he's on the other podcast with us, and so he was mesmerized by it as well. Is there any? I've seen a couple like tutorials of the La Sierra calisthenics like warm-up program. Do you have a recommendation for one? Is there one out there that you prefer that we could direct people to kind of just see what the routine is?
We actually did training films. There's if you go to motivationmovie.com, hit the training icon on top, the training button, and you'll have access to 2 training videos. I think it's $25 what Doug is charging for it, which is a great value. One video is me teaching from the World War II standards how to do every single exercise in the routine. And I want you to pay very, very careful attention to that, and don't change anything. And I mean that because, like, one of my mentors says, Ron, just do what I say, exactly what I say. You'll have 80% chance of success. Don't recreate the wheel. And I trusted her, and I did it, and I got 80% chance or 80% success rate with helping people get out of back pain. That's pretty good odds, right? So it was done a certain way for a certain reason, and that's how I taught it. The other video is me doing it with my buddy in real time. So after you know how to do all the exercises in the routine the right way, and count the cadence and yell the cadence, that's an extremely important part of the routine, is the counting part of it as a group, where you're voicing 1, 2, 3, 4. in time, in sequence, in unison. It pulls the group together. It's the most important part of the routine, not the fitness. That's what the alumni told us. Then you can watch the follow along and do it with us in real time. The La Sierra boys had different colors of shorts. It's like martial art belts, okay?
Yep.
The white level was the beginning level. And we call this the white level strength endurance routine. It's basically the best representation of the foundational calisthenics routine that La Sierra did. They had different versions over the years, but as an exercise science professional, I had to look at all that and say, okay, I'm asking children and teachers today to do this. What can we pull off with the postural deformities and physical literacy levels that are out there? And I wanted something to be safe and not be blowing up the kids the first week, because there was ethical concerns to it. So the exercises in there are very, very sound. I think they're worth doing. And I think if you do them the way that they're taught, that you'll be able to have a high chance for success and not create an injury problem for your school district. And that's super, super important, the safety part of it. There are people that have loosely put up, oh, here's how to do it, and the videos are awful. I'm just telling you, this is the lack of physical literacy. Even with strength coaches today and physical education teachers, they haven't been taught how to see detail. And so if you take that version, it's quite frankly not even worth doing. It's just a bunch of sloppy exercises like most people do. So I would say go get as close to the source as you can. That's the training videos off the Motivation Factor website, motivationmovie.com. Study them. If you want extra help, they can write me. I'm sharing some things with the PE teachers and helping them get it started. And we have found over the years that the best way to do it is to kind of do a shorter version of it. And I call it the demo version. It's a side straddle hop, which people will call a jumping jack today, a short set of push-ups, the full bends, which is for low back hamstrings, and then the stride hops, which is like a elliptical trainer running movement, but on the toes. They're toe drills, but with all the cadence counting. So if you know how to do that, you can do that whole routine as it's laid out in about 3.5 minutes. And that's one of the things my kids in PE did every day. We would do that little routine every day, almost every day, and with the counting. And so some of the teachers that rolled it out even before I did with actual kids said that what they did is they just taught like one drill a week. This week, we're just going to work on the side straddle hops and how to count them. Next week, we're just going to work on the push-ups, for a few minutes a day and how to count them. And then over a few weeks, they put it all together, and eventually they did the whole routine, which takes like 10 to 12 minutes. Then it has like over 10 exercises in it. And some of them are repeated like the push-ups. So it gets a little technical, but I think it's a great routine, has a lot of value. It'll teach the kids how to work together as a group. It'll teach the kids form. It'll develop cardiovascular fitness, not just from the hopping up and down, but the yelling. When you're yelling cadence on top of doing those ballistic exercises with good form, it's not easy. It's a lot of work. And so that's another value of yelling the cadence. Don't disregard the cadence. It's critically important. And what I've seen with the people posting YouTube videos of how to do it, they're not doing the cadence right, or it's just awful. So I know they're trying to do a nice thing, but sometimes you just got to get back to the source and pay attention.
That's what I was thinking. So we'll link that into the show notes.
Yeah.
Because we are sticklers for movement and doing things, movement and posture and technique trumps everything before volume and intensity. And like you said earlier, as Americans, we try to go from 1 to 10, and hopefully there's a pill that's going to get us there even faster. One last thing for you before we let you get out of here. We really appreciate your time. The thing we ask all of our guests, and I know you spoke about, learning to nasal breathe while you're running and always striving to learn more and improve more. Do you have any sort of daily rituals or practices that you do to help you level up every day or to be that 1% better?
I exercise every single day, 7 days a week for 30 minutes a day. And I haven't missed a day for 13 years, 14 years, every day. And that might sound extreme, but there are some days, depending on stress levels or energy levels or emotional things, where I might just go for a walk. And I'm not even worried about how fast I'm walking, but every single day I do 30 minutes of exercise. And, there have been times when I've been traveling a lot. And so I'm like, well, I don't have the time to get out and I mean, I'm doing hand wrist stuff in the car, but it's a mental discipline. It becomes more of a mental discipline than a physical thing at that point. But that's something that it's the only thing I've ever done with 100% success rate in my life because of the thousands of days of exercise. And many of them, I didn't want to do it because of whatever was going on in my life and whatever excuses I had. There wasn't one single day after I did the exercise that I regretted doing it. And I can't say that about anything else in life. I've never had anything that's been that successful. And sometimes I do 10 minutes here and 5 minutes there, but at the end of the day it's 30 minutes. And I might exercise an hour and a half too, but my minimum is 30 minutes a day of movement, even if it's slow, because we're designed to move. We're not designed to sit on a machine. And this is the danger of the lockdown and remote learning. It's like we're going to be spending all our leisure time on a machine, playing video games and watching Netflix, and now we're going to be learning on a machine. Where's the movement? It's going to kill us spiritually, right? Physically, obviously, but spiritually we're going to die if we don't start moving more and moving better too.
Ron,
So that's my one thing that I can give people is 30 minutes a day.
Appreciate that. Me and Richie try to do the same thing, even if it's not, too physical, at least at the bare minimum, go get a walk in, get some breathing in, just
That's
get
cool,
moving.
man. Yeah. And I want to compliment both of you are pretty young. And I just think it's very encouraging to see young men and young women start asking the right kind of questions and thinking intelligently. So it's important.
Yeah, physical culture is important, and like I said, being an educator and having been in the school system for 11 years, it
Yeah.
is unfortunate to see how some students come into the situation and then only get worse from there as they go. And yeah, I mean, everything you've said today resonates with us, and you're speaking our language. We talk about Move 365, and we try to promote that with our clients. That even if it's a bad day, you still got to try to get out and do something. Even if it's a walk, 30 minutes is going to make you 1% better than you were the day before. And then the emotional and spiritual components that go along with it, expressing the gratitude and the appreciation that come along with it, like focusing on the good that we have and not focusing on the lockdown or X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z is going to set you up for success every day, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So we appreciate your time today and sharing your thoughts with us, but we also appreciate the work that you've done. And yeah, we are going to continue to spread the word and share it with as many people that are willing to listen to us. So thank you for your time today, Ron. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. We're standing on the shoulders of giants because the people I study were just rock stars of PE. So I'm just paying it forward. I'm going to send you mentioned Oceanside. I'll send you a link to Glenn Sunby. You ever heard of him?
I have not.
He was part of the classical era of Muscle Beach with Jack LaLanne, and he set the world record for handstands. He did handstands on the top of the pyramids and the rail in Niagara Falls, and he was in Vegas and vaudeville and all this stuff, and he walked down every single step of the Washington Monument on his hands. He's in the World Book of Records for handstands and hand walking. But I got to meet him at Jack LaLanne's Hollywood Star dedication. He was in the crowd, and he was open to me talking to them, and he invited me over, and of course I did it. I went and interviewed him, and he gave me some stuff. In fact, his signed picture is right up there above me right now. Doing it. He was the guy on top of a lot of the classical Muscle Beach pictures doing an inverted one arm handstand.
Okay.
That was fun. So, but he lived in Oceanside.
Cool.